So welcome to my live lecture. I'm Dr Lisa Overton. You can search for me on the MDX website for my profile. Gives you a bit more information about who I am and what I do. I'm going to be talking to you today about one of the things that I do, which is around the idea of crisis. We're going to be looking today at what I think crisis is based on my research and my education background. How crisis sort of reveals and makes some lives more vulnerable than others, as well as how crisis can actually open up space for everyday people like you, like me, to reinvent your everyday spaces into something better. For me, I like to think of crisis as an umbrella term because it can include lots of different types of events and processes, such as disaster, conflict, war, terrorism, climate change, financial crisis, humanitarian crisis, protracted crisis, hard to say, pandemics, bad development. There's lots of different types of negative events that we can include under a crisis umbrella. Some of these terms you might think, oh yeah, I know exactly what that means. That's really clear cut. Others might seem a bit more complicated. But actually, even with the easy ones like disaster, for example, there's actually a lot of debate about what a disaster actually is. So if you yourselves would like to have a think about what you think a disaster is and type out any of your ideas in the Q&A, any thoughts, all answers are valid. And I know that everyone says that, but I do actually mean it because part of my research perspective is that disasters are subjective and lived experiences. So there really is no wrong answer to this type of response. You can even type specific events that you think are a disaster, what sort of words you would use. For example, is the COVID-19 virus, is that a pandemic or is it a disaster? Is a pandemic a disaster or a crisis? If COVID-19 virus is a disaster, then is the HIV pandemic, because that's a pandemic, a disaster, or is that a crisis? Is it something else? There's lots of different questions that you can ask yourself about what disasters actually are. There's been so much debate around these types of concepts since probably the beginning of time. And that's actually a good thing, because these spaces for debate can create new knowledge. They can also sort of give us lots of space for questions and then for more understanding. And this is exactly the type of thing that we would be doing in a workshop or a seminar, for example, in one of the departments I work in, which is International Politics. Debates among scholars on the types of crisis that I talked about just before, like disaster and conflict and humanitarian crisis, bring us sort of words and phrases that have some very general things in common. And we could use these things to sort of measure, okay, what could be included under this crisis umbrella. Because we might want to think about a way that we could perhaps define disaster or define crisis in a certain way, even though we know that there's a lot of debate around it. Some ways that this has been done is through thinking about crisis as negative consequences. So crisis events always being something that disrupt, that bring disorder, that undo our everyday life and even create chaos. So maybe we could agree that when we're defining crisis, there's nothing positive there. Perhaps rather than being events that bring negative consequences, we could think of disaster and crisis as the negative consequences themselves. Now, these are ways that have been used to define disaster specifically. So some might ask why we can't then say that disaster and crisis are defined in the same way and use them interchangeably. There aren't really right answers for this, as many of the terms and concepts you'll come across when you study in international politics or even within sociology, another department I teach in, there's lots of debate. There's even discussion about disasters being different because they're sudden events, whereas crisis can include sudden events, but also slow onset events, like protracted crisis is something that's often a slow onset type of event. Disasters have also been associated with things like hazards that emerge from nature or the environment, like earthquakes and hurricanes. In older times, or actually even people to this day still think this, that hazards and disasters are they're the same thing, and they use it interchangeably, saying things like natural disaster, which actually is a real problem because it suggests that if it's natural, then it can't be prevented, that it's a natural event, it's just going to happen anyway, the effects are going to happen anyway. But it was even defined at one point as an act of God. And this thinking, not only is it problematic by suggesting that the event can't be changed, but it's also problematic because it doesn't capture the fact that, yes, disasters will impact everybody, but they won't impact everybody in the same way. But disasters have also been described as something beyond the realms of anything you could ever imagine. Something that is so out of the ordinary, so far from the realities of the everyday that we can't actually know it until we see it, which is very bleak, especially if you're working in disaster risk reduction and disaster prevention. If a disaster is this something, this negative something that's way beyond anything we can ever imagine, then the next disaster is always going to be unknown. And then that means it's always unpreventable. Not natural, by the way, just unknown. This kind of is very challenging for people who are working within this sphere, that you can't control everything. But what we can know, even if disasters themselves are unknown, is that they all have a history, and they can be traced back, in my view, to something that's actually the same. If you want to trace back anything in history, you can actually use an approach called genealogy, which was invented by an old French dude called Michel Foucault. And his approach has actually been used by scholars ever since, up until this day. Frantz Fanon used it to explain colonial legacies of racism. Kimberly Crenshaw has used a type of genealogy to show how race and gender intersect to create oppression in the US. It's a really popular and interesting way to trace back the histories. So almost every disaster can be traced back in time. What you want to do when you're doing a genealogy is you want to get to those roots of how it came to be. So you sort of dig them out and you find this core. The core is usually knotted up in a matted old mess of many causes, but it does come down, in my experience, to one thing: the problem of the status quo, which is power. So let's think about the world today to illustrate this a little bit. The everyday lives that you once had now are disrupted by crisis, by disaster, by COVID-19, but that was not a perfect world before. That world was and is embedded in its own crises, multiple crises of inequalities and inequities. Gender, race, class, sexualities, disabilities, all of these and more structure our everyday world in such a way that it can actually even seem normal. And when inequalities and inequities seem normal, then maybe disaster and crisis is unpreventable. Because when these disadvantages remain intact, life is vulnerable, and some life is more vulnerable than other life. Not all life is valued equally. So when a hazard, a negative event, unfolds into a disaster, whose livelihoods, lives, and worlds are most at risk? There's actually nothing like a crisis to reveal how life is and is not valued. This is the dark underbelly of society. This is what the crisis, the disaster reveals. That underbelly is what society usually keeps hidden away, except those that live it, they know it every day, and maybe those that benefit from it, maybe they know, maybe they don't know. Disasters can touch everyone in their vicinity, but those who come off worse are those facing inequalities in normal life. When those inequalities are multiple, and what Kimberly Crenshaw has called intersectionality, those groups experience something very different, something even pernicious. And a disaster then is never natural because of the way in which it affects people differently. And it is always those who are discriminated against, who can be voiceless or feel invisibilized, who are worse off. Instead, as Mayatri Bandu has said, the disaster reveals what society's been hiding, but hiding in plain sight. Let's do some time traveling back to 2005, which is almost 16 years ago, to 23rd of August. Now that summer brought a huge global shock, Hurricane Katrina, that struck the Gulf Coast of the USA, or the US. In a way, Katrina could be seen as the first of its kind in terms of how the global media covered this disaster, how the economic losses were felt, and the way in which it devastated human lives in such a way that Katrina opened up a window of revelation. At the time, the US administration was projecting this fear of the outside with their global war on terror, suggesting that the inside, that the US was a safe place. Katrina ripped this myth open to reveal very vast, deeply entrenched inequalities going back centuries. These aren't new. So when Katrina hit, she hit everyone, but she did not hit everyone equally. Katrina hit impoverished communities who couldn't afford to evacuate to motels. The slur white trash, which indicates white people of low class, but actually is, as all slurs, derogatory and actually are real people who were completely devastated by Katrina. In New Orleans, African-American people are more likely to be living in social housing and less likely to be able to afford to evacuate. So Katrina discriminated by race and class together and created a compounded experience for African-American people. Because in America, the so-called poor are often working poor. So some are even in full-time jobs, but because wages and health insurance is so messed up over there, people get trapped in this cycle of poverty. And this poverty trap also trapped them physically in the city, making it too hard to evacuate, with many ending up at the very ill-fated Super Bowl center. Globally, women are underpaid, concentrated in lower paid industries like caring, nursing, teaching. They're more likely to be in charge of looking after children and elderly relatives. So women actually shouldered a very heavy burden post-Katrina, but some more than others. Those shouldering care loads are more likely to be poor. Black women in particular faced a triple threat post-Katrina. And in even more revealing ways, but lesser known, Katrina triple discriminated against poor trans women. And we know very little about this group because it's still so very hidden. And of trans men, we know it's practically invisible. So there are some groups whose voices, even though that's 2005, so 16 years ago, we still don't know how bad their experiences were or how they recovered or how they challenged the status quo because they're so hidden as a group. What we're doing here is we're looking at how various identities and processes intersect to create different experiences. So whilst everyone experienced the same hazard into their lives, the disasters that unfolded afterwards were changed to do with class, race, gender, sexuality, meaning that Katrina was not experienced in the same way by everyone due to most of the time pre-existing discriminations. So crisis does mean change, but change can sometimes be good because now this dark underbelly is fully revealed, more or less. All that dirty laundry is out there, the whole world can see it. There's this other idea about a different type of window, a window of opportunity, which was talked about by two people called Byrne and Baden in 1995. This idea that a window of opportunity can be opened up to create positive change for good. This was particularly related to gender and when they first brought out this term, but has been sort of used now in disaster and development in particular to show that once something terrible happens, you can build back better. Build back better is something that Boris Johnson is going on about quite a bit at the moment. He did not invent that. That came out of Katrina. and many others, which came out of the Burnham-Baden report. So this is also an issue about sort of people tagging on to change and using change for their own ends. But change can be good. Black Lives Matter, Me Too, these are global movements of change, often led by young people, those who were silenced, by those who media and other organizations constructed as helpless. They show us that these issues, which for many are everyday life, still organize societies and cultures unequally. These movements call for change, and not for the first time. There's a long legacy of change making that often comes from those who have been positioned negatively by others, by mainstream society, by the status quo, because of power. Change is not always about big movements, though. Not always about the national or even the global scale, like some of these ones I'm talking about now. Change is often about the local and the unheard stories, the unsung heroes, I like to call them, of daily life. And that's what my research looks at, because I look at the subjective experiences of crisis. For example, I looked at young women growing up after Katrina, 7 years after Katrina happened. And I led life history interviews with young women and trans people about what it was like to grow up after a disaster like Katrina. And yeah, guess what? The answers were not what I was expecting. The themes that actually came out were stuff around making first-time decisions, sexuality, relationships, education, career. All of these emerged as central for young women and young people navigating their lives. And under normal times, it would seem completely, totally normal that these are the things that young people would be thinking about. And what my research showed is that those things don't go away because disaster happens. In fact, they can be amplified even further, and sometimes even led some of my participants down a new path. And these paths that they went down changed their lives for the better. Because of this, crisis enables us to share and hear these remarkable stories. More recently, I looked at women's stories of the university lecturer strikes over pensions that happened in 2018. I took a perspective of putting higher education and crisis in the same bubble and explored values and future directions for university spaces. Because higher education can be read as a sort of crisis right now, especially there's a lot of risk. Financial, are you going to like it? Are you going to do something with it? Will it help your future? Has it been marketized? Even if the answer is yes to being marketized, though, students have often been among those that are at the forefront of change. Like in the 60s and 70s, students were leading civil rights backlashes, women's lib, gay rights, anti-war protests, anti-racist protests. Out of crisis and out of these big, even slow burn events, students and everyday people used university spaces to rise from these ashes. So crisis is much more than just these big events. So the pandemic as a big event to me, yes, is a crisis. We've lost people, industries, jobs. And within this, the crisis of the everyday for some people is completely under the radar still. For uni students living in insecure housing, paying rent for substandard accommodation is kind of normal, but it's way worse under a pandemic. Living back at home with family, feeling like your life is stuck or even going backwards. For school students studying in these changed circumstances, staring at screens for hours and hours and hours at a time, just thinking, where is this going? What is happening? Well, I can tell you some things about uni and school students post-Katrina, about where it led for them that might actually help you guys think about what you're doing now and what you might do in the future. They were and still are as a cohort, as a group, very unique in that during this huge time in their lives, being aged sort of between 15 to 18, where you're making massive decisions about education in particular or career, they lived through also a huge disaster that changed the whole world around them and changed them. And just like you, they're unique and living through this crisis that you're going through right now. The people I'm going to talk about, their names have been changed for confidentiality, but their stories are still the same. So I had two people, Bo and Phoebe, who they'd been in New Orleans their whole lives and they never thought they'd ever go anywhere. But actually, they decided that they would go away to college because the local colleges had been shut down. And it enabled them both to change their lives in different ways. Bo was able to come out as gay in their own way that they wouldn't have been able to have done with their family intervention. Phoebe suddenly realized that she could actually do things for herself, which she thought she never could do. Rita, on the other hand, had moved to New Orleans to start college, and then everything got shut down and she had to go back home. She got to enroll in a local college, which was great because it meant she could keep studying, but she really didn't want to be back home. It made her feel like she was going backwards. But then again, when she got to move back to New Orleans, she took everything. She just did everything. She didn't take anything for granted, and she ended up staying there for way longer than she thought because it just completely changed her life. Jessica had a complete rediscovery in her life, and her mum was with her dad, who was really violent. And during that time, Katrina gave her mum the courage to completely get rid of the father. And it meant that her and her mum and her sisters could go through this huge period of rediscovery, moving into a new area, which wouldn't have been possible before. Sarah Jane actually ended up coming back to New Orleans. She got this scholarship to do a PhD in a completely different place. And she just knew she had to go back to New Orleans to help. And she ended up not doing a PhD in the end, but running a fair housing charity. Cece was from the 9th Ward, and really where she was working at a government body that actually deals with disasters, FEMA. And at that time, she was kind of feeling stuck in her career. But because of Katrina, she used it to gain more professional qualifications and actually increase her career opportunities. So many things can change for the better because they made these decisions based on going through the crappiest time. It really wasn't great. So what did it all boil down to? Well, first-time decisions are really hard and scary. And in the midst of disaster, to make new decisions about your life can feel like it's its own crisis all on its own. The lessons you're learning are amplified, sometimes so loud and sometimes so suddenly. And maybe looking back, you might not even recognize yourself at that time. But when it comes to that time to look back, nearly everyone here, they just said, I did it. Elizabeth in particular, she was 16 at the time, addicted to drugs and alcohol and in a terrible place. But the moment in the silence of Katrina where she realized she had to change her life around meant she enrolled in a course, got her life together, and went through a really amazing artistic career. Harry, who had always been kind of looked after by their mum and sort of had to suddenly step up and be an adult in a way that they never imagined that they could. And Kayla and Jazz got hold of this performance group that was going to go under if no one took hold of it again for LGBT women. And by doing that, they created a safe space for a whole community, and it's still going to this day. It really shows how crisis can bring people together to create meaning through loss and through devastation. Sometimes even through gratitude, new meaning can be made. You're sitting here now, or in your virtual or real life classrooms, if you've been lucky enough to be in a real life classroom, by choosing to pursue your education, bringing with you your unique experiences of this crisis, or perhaps one too many more other crises that have been in your life. This creates meaning, and in classroom spaces and universities, on the modules we teach in politics and sociology, even in law, these experiences will shape your education space. With sociology students this year, I've examined higher education looking at this thing called critical university studies, where we actually took those interviews that I did, the transcripts from the 2018 strikes from the lecturers, and actually found that students and scholars had so much to unite around. And we also used this tool called Photo Voice, where we talked through experiences of lockdown life, and we created meaning with pictures, which was really amazing. Crisis can lead to change, to reinvent the everyday into something so much better if you let it. There's so many ways you can do that in the face of crisis. In the global pandemic, post-Hurricane Katrina, post-Asian tsunami, there are thousands of examples of everyday people and small grassroots groups making change. No one is ever just vulnerable, and never let anyone tell you that. You yourself can even learn about making change across your degree program. If you're coming to Middlesex, whether you choose politics or sociology, the second year students, with my second year politics students, have been exploring how higher education students feel about gender identity in higher ed. So they've been interviewing students about things like including gender pronouns and email and Zoom signatures, how they feel about gender neutral toilets, understanding how to create safe spaces for all genders, and how all of this might intersect with race, faith and class. And this is actually going to have real life impacts. It's going to have an impact to support the equality, diversity and inclusion initiatives. So what we do in the class actually ripples out into real spaces. My third year politics students, they run these crisis simulation activities. So they build on my disaster research, but they do their own desk-based research and create press reports and press papers with recommendations. And these are all kind of like practice runs for future roles in activism or government or even just change making in general. You also, if you do politics as a degree, get to choose a module that allows you to plan an activist campaign all by yourself as part of the assessment. And you can even run them outside of the class if you want to go ahead and run these campaigns. So it's really important when teaching on crisis and change that like the assessment's relevant to that. So for me, making assessment and teaching relevant to real life through change making means that you get to experience as well as get some power to shape what is important. So like in gender, power and politics, I will support students to plan an event like a World Cafe style event around the gender issues that the students themselves choose. And all of this can make the classroom space a space where change can actually happen right in front of you. From the local to the global and to the classroom, there are so many spaces for you to make change, and there is so much power in this change. But it's so rare for anyone to just stand there and say, I have power. But you do have power. Yes, power is limited by all of these things I've talked about today, and probably even more than that, to be fair. But you've come to this live lecture, so you've exercised your power to learn. And maybe then, and maybe you're already doing, you can exercise your power to make change. For me, like research, especially qualitative research, because that's my thing, gives a glimpse into people's lives for just a tiny time. And this is what research-led teaching is all about to me. It's about bringing these stories to you so I can create space for you to become your own type of researcher, guided spaces so that you can kind of explore and find space to grow and share with each other your own knowledge. So if you've ever felt unheard or silenced because of who you are, because of your gender or your race or your class, disability, anything, you've so much to learn from each other. It's unreal. Even if your experience is something different, the feeling of exclusion can be felt in so many ways that it's amazing how we can talk across that, even if we don't understand where someone's coming from at first. And at Middlesex in particular, you're going to meet people from so many walks of life to connect with, to share with you and to grow with. It's like amazing. Oh, pressed a weird button there. So teaching under the umbrella of crisis to me is all about sharing remarkable stories of people making change, from what might seem to you very small, all the way to the biggest global scale, to show you how you can bring change and bring other people together, to show you how you can open up space for you to create your own change and to create new space. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was actually wonderful and very interesting, and I actually learned new things as well. If anyone has any questions, feel free to use the chat and we will try to answer the questions. But at the moment, we don't have any question.
Cool. Yeah. I'll pop a little slide here of some resources
Okay.
So I mentioned a few thinkers during that talk. The sources I've put here are all open access. And as I didn't have time to talk about lots and lots of examples, the two at the bottom, they're from UN Women, like give examples of like young people making change like in everyday life, from everything from trying to change abortion laws to providing better access to technology. So everything's here if you guys are interested.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, if you have any questions, please remember that you can use the Q&A button and we will try to answer your questions. And yeah. Okay. Okay. So we got a question. Someone say, sorry, is this a law course?
So if you do law, you can take a joint law degree that will, I think it's international law or BA law with international politics or international relations. And you can also take some of the international politics courses as elective. So that one I talked to you about on humanitarianism and global change, that is an elective module from politics that law students can take.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else answer questions? Please don't be shy. You have all the opportunity you want to ask a question today. Okay, she replied or he replied. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, it's a good question.
So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. We still have like a couple of minutes left. Okay, we have another question. Is there an opportunity to study abroad with this course?
Yes, you can. You can do either one semester or a year abroad in one of Middlesex University's partner universities, which is possible. And some of our students have done that. We quite often have it the other way around, actually. We often have students come from like France or China, they're the most popular countries to come over to come here and study abroad. I think someone, I had a student a few years ago from, I think she was from Poland, and she was only meant to be here for a semester, but she loved it so much because it was so different to her communications degree that she wanted to stay. So she stayed the whole year. So there's options to study abroad for a semester or a whole year. And there's actually like a dedicated part of Middlesex that helps you like deal with that. There's also the Erasmus exchange program, which is really, really great. I don't personally know a whole lot about that, but I know that if you get in touch with like Uni Help and like that, they can put you in touch with the right people.
Yeah, definitely. And also on the Middlesex website, there's still a lot of information about the program if you want to study abroad. And I would actually advise everyone to still have a look if you're interested. It's a wonderful opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Rosie. I went to Middlesex University myself. That's where I did my degree, and I did a year. I did a 4-year degree with a placement year, and I went to Sri Lanka and worked in a women's organisation for a year.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was. It was like literally the best and worst thing I did in my whole life, because it was the best because I did things I never thought I could do and got opportunities that I never thought I could get. But at the same time, like I really did miss home. But like it was so good to do, you know. It's like it challenges you, but it's so good if you can do it. So yeah, I totally agree with Rhodey, like taking that opportunity where you can is amazing.
But why did you also say it's like the worst as well, like the best and the worst?
I think because I don't think I really realized how different it was going to be.
Yeah.
Like I was doing international development studies, and I think I had a really, I think that of the view of that time that like if everyone just worked together, everything could change and be positive. And then
Yeah.
I realized, like, you know, the colonial legacy in Sri Lanka was quite strong, and there were so many issues of colonialism, and was development even just an extension of that, and what was it? And it kind of gave me a bit of a crisis of whether I was sort of studying for the right thing.
Oh, I
So
see. Okay. We also have another question. This is a great lecture. Thank you. Any idea our lecturers we commence in October? Our lecture, sorry, we commence in October. I also have a 2.5 years of research on many big issues like global research, and I would like some help. How best I can use this info.
oh, thank you very much for the lovely feedback. So October, there are two plans. There is plan one, which is that everyone's back on campus as normal. And there is plan two, which is a blended approach to learning, where some will be online and some will be offered on campus. There is the hope that at least one module per year group will be facilitated on campus, at least. But of those modules, if you wanted to stay online because you know you couldn't come due to like travel restrictions from your country or wherever it is, if you're coming from somewhere else, that you can still follow along online. We've had some really great feedback from our students about being online and sort of the process of learning. It's not for everyone. It's definitely not the easiest thing in the world, but we've done the blended learning thing and done a bit of campus and a bit of online. And with the vaccine program, we're hopeful. So it's sort of an open question. And with regards to your research background that you've got, that's really fascinating. And something I'd say actually at Middlesex is, the Middlesex Student Union always have different jobs on offer to go and do community-based work, which are all paid. And there's also the opportunity to sign up with MDX Works, where any kind of like research jobs or all types of different jobs are advertised through there, and they're all based on at least the London living wage. They're all paid pretty decently as well as that. So, and getting in touch with employability. So in the law department, so the law department encompasses anyone who wants to study law, international politics, sociology, criminology. That's the Department of Law. And we have a specialist employability advisor called Gemma, who also studied at Middlesex. And she's like, can help you like gain access to employment that suits you best, as if you wanted to do it as additional to your studies as well. But of course, just bringing that experience into the classroom space will be amazing.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, guys? Don't be shy to ask.
I'm just gonna wiggle my bum. I have to remember to get up and move around a lot and things. Yeah, so in my online classrooms, we do get up and do things, and in the taught spaces, I definitely prefer being on campus for me, but a lot of our students this year have just been so great online, and we've all like learnt new technologies together. We've had different conversations, and it's been like a real privilege to get to know people. But often on campus, I like to do a lot of active sessions so that we're all engaged. Oh, I'd love it to be on campus too, Katrina. I really would. I'm keeping all my fingers and toes completely crossed that that's what's going to happen. I'm so looking forward to meeting you and meeting everybody.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Okay. Any other questions, guys? We still have like a couple of more minutes left.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a stupid question either.
Oh yeah, true, definitely.
And I feel like a bit of a fraud saying that because I'm terrible at asking questions. I always think my question is like rubbish, but like literally they never are. So like anyone who's feeling like, oh no, my question's rubbish, like I swear to you it's not, but I really feel for you. I really feel the struggle. And you can always like email me if there's something you want to ask me. If you like I said, if you type my name into the Middlesex website, my email address will come up on there as well as more information about what I do. Thank you again, Katrina.
Okay. So yeah, if you also need to just check like more informations on the university website, which is www.mdet.ac.uk, feel free. There's a lot of information about like your course, the modules you're going to study, and there's also like the chat option to chat with one of the is it like the students as well? So
there's like uni help and you can talk to a past student. There's like it's really cool for facility because it's the live chat, and plus there's also a special COVID-19 section. I think it's on the top of the website, so it keeps you updated on like changes that are happening as we go along and stuff. So you know we do try and keep everything updated. And if you're on social media, you can like follow Middlesex on like Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. If you're on social media.
Yeah. And if you're also on LinkedIn, there's also the media.
Yeah,
LinkedIn. They're literally everywhere. So
yeah, so whatever platform you're on, or if you're like me and you're kind of like having a break from all the platforms, then just check the website. But if you're active on your socials, then
yeah,
check out one of the places. You'll find Middlesex there, jibber jabbering away. Middlesex Politics has also got a Twitter account as well if you're interested in
okay.
Helen, my
Sounds
colleague, she posts regularly on there, and she's great. She's very cool.
That's good. Okay, I think if you're okay, we could wrap up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Final chance for any questions. Otherwise, it was great to sort of meet you all in the sort of weird void of cyberspace, and I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing you all on campus. Whatever degree program you're doing, I'll be in the Williams building. Come and say hi.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, guys, for actually attending to the sessions. We really appreciate the effort and everything, and also the questions you ask. Please feel free to just use the Middlesex website if you have like any other inquiries or anything. Thank you so much, and have a lovely evening. And I'll say bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.